show here for the NBA. We got a new crew. We got me, Chris Spags, joined by the savant himself, the you're here for Mr. Fast Eddie Fair. How you doing, Eddie?
I'm doing very well. How you doing today, Chris?
I'm good. I'm making content here. We're going back to back. I've learned so much in the last hour from our beat writer friend Rod Beard.
Yeah, he's one of the guys who really has embraced the DFS community and come out and said, I am trying to provide content that will help you guys, as opposed to. And it's not that some of the reporters haven't very reasonably taken offense because they either themselves get news wrong, which happens once in a while, or they pass along news and then the coach then goes against whatever plans he stated and they get a ration of shit that they don't deserve. So there's certainly some media who are not big fans of the DFS community, but Rod has embraced us wholeheartedly, even writing occasional DFS-based stuff himself.
Yeah, he seemed like he was pretty up on it, about as much as one can be while having a full-time job being a beat reporter. But yeah, very smart guy. Check that video out. He's one of Awesemo's friends. They do charity work together. And it was an interesting thing to learn about with the beat writers, who are a very important part of this ecosystem, and one that Eddie relies on to put together all of his projections and stuff that you guys have been making money off of all preseason. One thing, let's promote real fast. We do have a 1 free week trial for our services at awesemo.com. All the ownership projections, rankings, all the content that you've come to know and love from our team. They're available for you right now if you use promo code LiveBeforeLock. Very creative, inventive promo code we came up with for this. You can get 1 week free right now. Ownership is going to be really helpful on this slate, as I'm sure we'll talk about at length shortly. But go join now. Promo code LiveBeforeLock. Eddie, what are we doing? What are we doing? I want your brain. I just need this. I need some better lineups. What are we doing, champ?
Yeah, so we're dealing with obviously a not incredibly sexy 2-game slate, but 4 certainly compelling teams. So there's some exciting basketball to watch tonight, and I think it is important not to have the exact same attitude towards DFS every single day that you play. And this is a more casual day where you can be excited that, holy moly, you can be excited that basketball is back, and enjoy yourself, and certainly feel free to make a wager or two and join a contest or two. But there's not necessarily the reason to look at this as the day with the most edge in the world. There are a few things that I'm looking at, guys who I think will be underweight, guys I'd want to be overweight on against the field, and so on and so forth. But yeah, it's it's a pretty exciting day there. So just talking about the slate in general, I do think it's a better idea to target the second game, not just for the pace, but also for how we can expect the minutes to be distributed. This Celtics team is going to have a little bit of trouble getting enough minutes for all the guys on it that they want to see a significant amount of time. And I think that will bear itself out to a certain point in DFS, and we're going to have to readjust some of our expectations for this team. I mean, they want to give appreciable minutes to Rozier, Smart, Irving, Tatum, Hayward, Brown, Morris, Horford, Baines. That's 9 guys. So, like, Semi Ojeleye, Daniel Tice, people are talking about today. Those are guys 10 and 11 to get on the floor for this team. So, I am a little more inclined towards the second game for the pace, for the specific price on some of the players. And again, in this first game, we deal with a Boston team that's very, very good defensively. And again, a Philadelphia team that also runs fairly deep. And one of its big studs, Ben Simmons, has had a fair amount of trouble with Boston. That certainly doesn't take him out of play. But in any cashy concept, I'm a little more excited about the guys on the Thunder and the Warriors than I am about the guys in the 76ers and the Celtics.
Just to point out right now, I am aware of the fact my face is frozen on the screen in the most unflattering face imaginable. This must have been how your porn spyware situation must have feel very vulnerable right now.
I'm not going to lie. The porn I look at doesn't look much like this. This looks more like sort of like snuff films or, kids, this is why you shouldn't learn boxing. Something like that.
Oh boy. Yeah, I do look a little punch drunk in there, or regular drunk. What are we going to do? It's fine. If you could fix it, great. If not, I don't care.
I'm happy it is apparently working and streaming correctly. And, I'm going to buy you a webcam and some better cable or whatever's going on there. I don't know what it is. I saw you the other day and you did look like the porn I used to get as far as the quality and the pixelation in 1990 when you're 14.4 baud modem getting that shit. People don't know the struggle. People don't know the struggle was real. You were down there, and you were this horny teenager, and you're like, I'm gonna download. Like I remember clearly the first time I saw a movie because it was just pictures for a while, and you did download on that shit, and it's coming out one line at a time. You're like, oh, it's gonna be. Oh yeah, I can see a forehead in like 30 seconds. This is gonna get great, and so this shit's coming out. And the worst is occasionally you get most of the way to the bottom. You're like, oh, she's got a dick. It's just the worst. That used to, like 1 out of 100 that used to happen, and you're like, oh, god.
Oh boy. So this is the one topic. This is the one topic we got in trouble for talking about in the live stream, Eddie. That we we once went on a rant about my favorite adult film starlets for a while. That was not well received by senior management. But Eddie's a loose cannon. That's why we're doing the stream. Eddie, you're gonna keep me loose. I'm getting too corporate now with all this awesemo.com time.
Okay.
So
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I'm not mad at all. I just did my job. I did my part now, Eddie.
I apologize. I will get 2 tweets later today. Like my son was listening because we're playing fantasy basketball together. I apologize. That was. I get carried away. So let's talk about some basketball and
yes.
on this early game. One of the guys I'm really interested in, who I think will be under-owned, and I would certainly be over-owning him relative to the field on almost any side I played on, would be Dario Saric. I like Dario a lot in this matchup. He was extremely good in the postseason. Again, I guess this isn't obvious to everyone, but they had a 5-game series at the end of last year. I rewatched some of the highlights of a few of those games earlier today, and I was struck by how good the matchup was for Dario Saric and how well he played. And on DraftKings, he's just way too cheap. And on FanDuel, I think a lot of people go punt-tastic on the power forward position. And I'm a little more excited about trying to find that punt somewhere else and putting Dario Saric in there, who I think has a real upside. In that, I could look up the exact numbers, but in that series, the first 3 games, he had like 30 every game, because I remember touting and discussing these games in the playoffs. I will actually look it up. Here it is. First game, he had 28.75. Second game, he had something very similar, and same as the third. Second game was 29.75. Third game was 30.75, so he's accruing by a point a game there. Fourth game, decided to assert himself a little bit, 45.5, and fifth and final game of the series, 51 DraftKings points. So up projection through the 4 games, minimum of 28.75. I expect the ownership to be very tolerable on both sites. And I don't think, the relevant changes to the matchup is Hayward is out there, which I do think is a marginal downgrade versus seeing more of that time against, Marcus Morris was on the court sort of in that position, but I wouldn't consider more than, a percentage or point or 2 relevant. So Dario Saric is probably the guy, certainly from the 76ers, that I would try to overweight the most on.
I am actually fully with you, Eddie. I think especially with Wilson Chandler still not in the lineup, I think Saric is in a good spot. People are going to be, apparently according to our ownership, which actually I didn't check the most recent update, but people seem to be owning more Covington than they are Saric right now. And I think to me, that's a fool's errand. I don't know why people always want to talk themselves into Covington. Well, Saric is a much better player, does a lot more across the board.
Yeah,
so for me,
please.
Yeah.
No, I was just going to say, like, if you look again at that same series where Covington played so badly against these Sixers that they actually pulled him out of the starting lineup against the Celtics, rather. Mm-hmm. They actually did not start the entire series because it was going so poorly. I will pull up the numbers in a second, but as I recall, in those 5 games, he had 2 games in single digits, 2 games in the teens, and 1 game with like 45. So you are saving, I think Covington on DraftKings, for example, is $4,700. You are saving $800, and he's certainly someone who in terms can absolutely maul his price. But I have heard him mentioned a lot today, and that does tend to, portend some sort of ownership issue. So right. I'm much more excited about playing Dario Saric. And again, this is a phenomenal defensive unit on Boston. Not everyone is 100%, but their scheme is incredibly good, and they have personnel that's good enough to still make it a pretty imposing matchup. And you could see that in how they really held Ben Simmons down during that postseason series, and they guard the line extremely well. So when you're playing Bob Covington, you're hoping for threes and steals. Like that's the game you want out of him to make a tournament winning lineup out of Bob Covington is 5 steals and 4 3-pointers, and he ends up with some crazy line. This is not a team that turns the ball over a lot, and this is not a team that allows a lot of threes to be made. So that just means that his odds of hitting his ceiling game go from whatever 12% to 9% or something. Like, he's very, very much in play. Starting today and for every day of the season at request, I went back from the projections I did in the preseason to going back towards letter rankings for all players in both cash and GPPs on all teams. And Covington would certainly be a better tournament play than a cash play to me, because there's a real chance he plays 23 minutes and scores 9 fantasy points. Like, that wouldn't surprise me at all.
He is a frustrating player to have on your roster at any, except when he goes off, which is usually a thing that happens. But those times where I'd rather have Covington or when he's under 5%.
Well, and he's also, one of my my pet peeves is that he's not an incredibly predictable basketball player. Like, he doesn't go off as scheduled.
Yes.
Like, there are guys who are like, oh, he's got that matchup, he's going to be good.
Playoff matchup real fast. I'm just curious your thoughts on him. Aaron Baines, what are you thinking about him?
Yeah, I think he's a pretty compelling tournament play. I would rather play Nerlens Noel in almost any situations. I'm a big fan of Nerlens Noel tonight, but I certainly think you can run yourself out some Aaron Baines, who you do expect to still see a significant proportion of time. I would think he gets 19 to 21 minutes because they do need the big body against Joel Embiid. But what's interesting is last year when you gave him minutes, you were taking minutes away from Marcus Morris and a couple other guys. Now that you're back to full strength and you have Kyrie and Gordon Hayward back out there, you are sacrificing a little bit more by putting him on the court. So it's going to be interesting to see how they peel away the minutes to get him enough time in this game. But I do think he's just fine to play in tournaments.
Yeah, I think too. Position where you need to save some money, or you can save some money rather, and also to pivot to Damian Jones, I think he does make a little bit of sense.
Sure.
I wouldn't go crazy on him, but I just remember the fact that he and Embiid really hated each other, which, NBA the narrative game a little bit. I do think that it's the worst idea in the world. Let's talk about the late game, Eddie. Let's give us your overview on that. Also, yes, one thing to point out real fast, which I was asked to point out before, there is a pretty big contest right now on FanDuel, which apparently is shaping up to have some overlay. And I know, Eddie, you do love pushing overlay to the folks and helping them out find some value. In regular season NBA, it is a lot harder to find that value compared to preseason NBA. But on FanDuel right now, apparently that contest is having a tough time filling. So go check it out. Go make some lineups. Go make some random drop one lineups.
Yeah, very rarely will anything you or I say have the value that is presented to people when you have some sort of overlay. Again, contests most days are going to take in $1 and pay out 85 cents for every dollar they take in. When they pay out 95 cents or $1.06 or some other number, that's pretty exciting. So contest selection is a key part of being profitable, especially as this gets more and more difficult. So certainly a big fan of finding your way, and I'll get an eye on that site and talk about that overlay when I can spot it as we get closer to. I'm just trying to think if there's anyone else I want to discuss in the early game a little bit more in depth, because obviously we haven't alluded to a lot of guys. I think you can Marcus Morris. He's someone who I expect to be fairly popular. I would generally rather pivot away because he's one of those guys, and there's obviously a lot of them, who we have last year's presupposition on, and as I mentioned, he's not going to get the same kind of time that he got last year. So I don't think he gets 20 minutes this game. So generally, I'm trying to look at other players to pick up that spot. Maybe with Gordon Hayward playing his limited time of 25, 27 minutes, that's something you can do. But the 9 players I mentioned are the guys I think are in play even on a 2-game slate. Daniel Tice and Semi Ojeleye are the guys who I consider a bridge too far. Tice, I'm not sure plays, and Semi Ojeleye I do think probably plays, but I think he plays 8 or 10 minutes, and he is one of the worst fantasy basketball players in the history of the NBA. He is allergic to scoring any relevant amount of points. So you could guarantee me 20 minutes out of Semi Ojeleye tonight, and at the bare minimum on either side, I'd have absolutely no interest. I'd literally project him for 9 fantasy points. So, we'll stick there with that. As far as the 76ers go, Brett Brown said at least twice that I found record of that TJ McConnell is going to pick up some of the time vacated by the absence of both Wilson Chandler and Mike Muscala at the big. So they are going to play small some more. And that certainly puts him in play as a reasonable pivot here, and I end up having him pretty similar to, say, Quinn Cook, with the news that Sean Livingston is in fact going to play tonight. If Sean Livingston was going to be out, that raises your minutes projection for Quinn Cook by probably 4 or so. That would have made him a strictly superior option to me. Now I'm pretty fine either way you want to go there. But yeah, Timothy John, someone else you can look at. So briefly alluding to the second game, I would much rather, if prices make it okay, play Jeremy Grant to Pat. Patrick Patterson is not a fantasy asset. Like he very possibly could get 10 rebounds, but if you guaranteed me he'd get 10 rebounds, I'd still have to sit there and think for a while about playing him in DFS. I mean, he just does not take any efficient number of shots. If you asked me to guess his line tonight, I would say 24 minutes, 8 rebounds, 3 points on 1 for 3 shooting, making a 3-pointer, and an assist and a turnover or something. Like that's what he tends to do. It is a rare game where he does anything incredibly of value. And again, not a matchup where I see him springing free and getting a lot of 3-pointers. So obviously, some sites it's $1,200 more to pay to get up to say Jeremy Grant. But I'm much more excited about Nerlens Noel. So for 3 reasons. One, it's not 100% yet, I don't believe. I'll continue checking news as we go through this, and that's one of the nice reasons to have you on the show, is you can talk for a bit and I can look around at some shit. But first off, I'm not certain Steven Adams is going to play. He is warming up, and in theory, will play. I'd probably go 80-20 he plays, but a 20% chance he sits is really considerate because it makes Nerlens Noel just the nuts. It's an incredible matchup for Nerlens Noel. I'm going to pull up some Nerlens Noel splits while we're talking, but I've seen him play Golden State a couple times, and it goes extremely well for him, and you would think it would. He's a guy who is going to do much better in a rim running, a bit more pace kind of game. So let's see. For example, last year he played Golden State once. He only played 12 minutes. He had 8.7 rebounds and 2 steals. Okay, that's pretty good. Let's say the year before that.
Not a bad performance.
Yeah, that's just fine. And again, that was 12 minutes. That's 21 fantasy points or something like that. Year before that, he played Golden State one time, played 17 minutes, had 14.7 rebounds, 1 block. So yeah, like it is a very, very good matchup for him. So your downside is, okay, he plays 19 minutes. I do think he and Steven Adams will share the entirety of the 5 minutes. And Steven Adams not being 100%, I would have projected for a hair under 30 even if he started. So I'll say Steven Adams gets 29 and Nerlens Noel gets 19. I'd project him for 22.5 fantasy points in those 19 minutes. He's a lifetime over fantasy point a minute guy. And I don't think the ownership is as high as some of the other punts. And I don't mind him, even at center on FanDuel. Because unless you're paying the 10-4 for Embiid, which is sort of a sticky wicket, that price is pretty significant, then, yeah. So, I'm a pretty big fan of Nerlens Noel here. Probably Noel and Saric are the 2 guys I'm like, you know what, I'm going to overweight the field. I can see these things both working out. And there's also a chance that, Adams' back acts up on him. Wouldn't be the craziest thing in the world. And there's just a chance that Noel plays really well and gets run, and they split the minutes 24-24. And there's a reasonable chance they get blown the hell out. In which case, Nerlens Noel would conceivably close the game. Not necessarily. They could run small. Something else could happen. But there's just a lot of ways I can see Nerlens Noel playing 22-24 minutes, in which case he could pretty easily get 30 fantasy points. And, about a 20% chance I can see that he will randomly play an extremely significant number of minutes. And, if Steven Adams sits and he plays 36 minutes, then, yeah, I would want him at $3,600 in absolutely every single lineup I built.
Is he the main value guy you're looking at that game, or does Ray Felton enter the equation for you at all?
He enters the equation for me. I'm more conservative on his minutes total than other people. I've heard people today say repeatedly, like, I think he's going to play 22, 24 minutes. I've heard a couple different sets of people have debates on it. I would have him lower than that. I'll go 17 minutes is about where I'd put the over-under, with a low of like 14 and a high of like 21. Westbrook did not play in the entirety of the preseason, and pretty sure Raymond Felton didn't see 20 minutes. I know there's a 14, a 17, and a 19. Maybe there's another game I missed and maybe randomly caught 20 somewhere, but that's a little different because they're playing more third stringers, and it varies depending on whether Schroeder and or George were in, so there's some externalities there. But I'm fine playing Felton. He's a low key, very decent fantasy production guy. So he would definitely be in my pool. Again, if you look at the premium members got access to a spreadsheet I put out today. And basically, the players on that spreadsheet would be the people I would have in a pool if I was building 150 lineups. And it's worth spending maybe 60, 90 seconds talking about sort of the theory here. So there are such massive top prizes here that you want to give yourself a shot at winning them. And the question becomes, are you sort of building your lineups to be okay sharing that prize with 200 people? Or do you want to give yourself a shot of sharing it with single-digit people? Like, one of the reasons I like Noel is you run Noel in another off-color play. Let's say you have one lineup I really like today had Saric and Noel and Hamidou Diallo, and basically the other players you have to play, and that was, I think, the favorite lineup that I was toying with on DraftKings. And, if that gets all the way home, which also, works kind of well if they get blown out, then that lineup, I think I'm sharing with 4 or 5 people, so that's $50,000 as opposed to $1,800 if I share it with 125 people. So, you should have, and the other thing, which I guess we're restarting at the beginning of the year, so I have to re-say some of the sort of obvious stuff, is especially on a 2-game slate. On like a 15-game slate, you can just crunch it up and throw your good cruncher guys in there, and whatever you come up with is usually going to be almost as good as if you did it by hand. But especially on a 2-game slate, one of the spots in which using cruncher or other utilities that let you build a lot of lineups is it is harder to tell a story. Now, cruncher has the ability to say, I want to correlate this guy with this guy and to set up different filters. But if you just go, I want X% of this guy and X% of this guy and X% of this guy, you will frequently deal with misaligned stories, which is, for example, I'm going to play the story that the first game is low scoring. One of the postseason games they had last year, I think, had only 199 points. So I'm going to really underrepresent the first game. Maybe play one guy. Maybe play just Dario. And the second game, I think it's going to be a blowout. So because I think it's going to be a blowout, I'm going to play Nerlens Noel and Jordan Bell and Hamidou Diallo and Quinn Cook. And that's probably too many value guys. I wouldn't have enough studs to spend anywhere near all the money. But you get my point. Have a theory of, I think thing A and thing B are going to happen, especially if you're just building 1 or 2 lineups. So I want to overstress the first game in the starters. I want to have some correlation in your lineups. Don't just crunch out a pile of dudes, if you can.
Do you find Paul George to be as much of a must play as I do?
Very, very close to it. Just at price, it is really difficult to get away from George and even Dennis Schroeder. People have been watching my shows for a few years. I very rarely say 100%. And there's no one here that's 100% tonight. But the night where there was no Paul George, no Russell Westbrook in the preseason, I went 100% Dennis Schroeder. I was like, he can't fail. And he had a horrible game and had 41 fantasy points at $5,000 or something. Like, it was when you add Paul George in there, you are now dealing with the possibility that one of them fails. And it's more likely Schroeder because of his lack of additional peripherals and suspect shooting in the game in question. He was, I want to say, he went 5 for 17 in that game where he had 41 fantasy points. But with the possibility of a blowout and various other things, they are fadeable. But certainly if I'm building a lineup, I'm probably starting with Dennis Schroeder and Paul George. I consider them roughly as unfadeable simply because of the pricing discrepancy there. Paul George is like 8K, 9K. Dennis Schroeder is like 6.5. That roughly computes with their projections, and there's a couple more guards I like. So, yeah, I think if I was building 150 of lineups, I would probably have somewhere between 100 and 125 of each of them.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I'm a little less bullish on Schroeder than you are, just because I've seen him kind of wilt into the background when things don't go his way. Yeah. But it is hard to disagree with the kind of minutes he's going to get and the matchup. I mean, he's done well versus Golden State before, where he was the Hawks' main driving force. So that does give me some confidence, but I just think Paul George takes so much usage off the table, and Schroeder can get out of a rhythm without just getting the volume that he needs. Yeah, where I'm a little more comfortable playing George, but I don't know. I could see where you're going with it, though.
Yeah, I'm definitely more comfortable playing George. I mean, there's an adjective choice game here. Like, comfortable? I'm absolutely more comfortable playing Paul George. I'm not like, oh, Dennis Schroeder, I feel safe. I'm going to have a glass of milk and go to sleep. It's definitely still sketchy. But there's also the advantage of, obviously, the pace is way up, and Pat is just not going to take any shots. So that just, portends additional usage, and whatever guy they put out there next to him, be it Hamidou Diallo, be it Turd Ferguson, be it Alex Abrinas, whoever is out there at the two with them, simply doesn't have Schroeder's ability to create his own shot, which he likes to do, and bringing up the ball the whole time. So that guy's not going to get as many shots either. So if you're dealing with, we'll do some rounding, 36 minutes of Steven Adams and 36 minutes of Pat and 36 minutes of Paul George and Schroeder and whomever they throw out at the two, you would end up with 18 or 19 Paul George and Dennis Schroeder shots, about 10 from Steven Adams, and about 8 from whoever gets stuck in there at shooting guard, and 3 or 4 from Pat. So I'm also just very confident there's going to be enough usage at his price. He can't completely shit the bed. Like, maybe he can. Maybe he plays so badly they put Felton in, and he plays 21 minutes and scores 11 fantasy points. That's obviously a non-0% chance. But I think the most likely situation is that there's a lot of volume and some shots go in, and he scores, I think I had him projected for 34 fantasy points, and that's pretty appealing at his price.
Yeah, that's enough to get you there on this kind of slate.
Yep.
For sure, as long as you're differentiating in other spots.
Yep.
A question for Gabriel Moreno in the YouTube chat. We are checking both chats, by the way, the premium chat on Slack, which you can get if you're an Awesemo.com premium member. Again, promo code live before lock will get you 1 week free. But also we are checking the YouTube chat. So drop your questions in there, preferably not just either ors, so we don't want to kill ourselves. But in general, some sort of heady questions that you guys have, please leave them in there. A question about who would you go with on FanDuel when you're choosing a center, given your love of Nerlens Noel and Joel Embiid's seeming inevitability of success. How would you approach that on FanDuel?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I'll load this up and take a real quick look at it. I think Noel is very much in play. He's 4,000 on the nose there, I want to say. So he's also fulfilling your I'm a quasi-punt role. Again, with their new scoring there, you want someone who randomly clocks in at 0. So you can build a pretty burly lineup with, having 3 quasi-punts. Like the lineup I'm looking at right now has 3 guys that cost 4,700 and less. And you can obviously change this around to do various things, but it has Jeremy Grant and Nerlens Noel and a minimum price guy. I enjoy the potentiality there. But looking at all the centers, I think Nerlens Noel is a fine tournament play. And if you had cash plays at every other position you liked, not out of play in cash. I would rather play him at 4,000. I mean, there's Damian Jones. I would rather play Damian Jones for cash, I guess. It's close, though. I mean, it's really close. I really don't project him for that many more minutes. Like, Damian Jones is not going to play more than like 21 minutes as an absolute maximum. If the starter's crushed, he's not playing that much because they end up with Bell or Looney or someone else backing him up in there for most of the game. And if the game stays competitive, he still just doesn't get past 20. 21 is really the ceiling you're hoping for there. There's a number of ways in which Noel gets 24, 26, but there's a chance Steven Adams plays 33 and he plays 15. So for cash, I probably barely fall on the Damian Jones grenade. For tournaments, I'd be much more excited about Nerlens Noel. Jordan Bell at 5,400 is points per dollar, not very exciting, but is going to have a low enough ownership, and he can sort of crack the slate a little bit. Like, Jordan Bell can get 3 steals, 2 blocks, and a double-double in 24 minutes. He's a very good fantasy basketball player. He's actually kind of similar to Nerlens Noel in that way, and the ownership is going to be probably even lower than Noel on that site because that price doesn't feel that good. Steven Adams is just tournaments because, again, there's a non-zero chance he sits. Al Horford is the cash mid-range guy if you're going to go. I don't love the matchup for him, but I certainly don't hate it. And then, Joel Embiid, you can obviously play in cash or tournaments. And again, looking at that, he is the better option between him and Ben Simmons in this particular matchup. They played in the 5 games of that series, for example. He outscored Ben either 4 of 5 or 5 of 5. I'd have to look it up, and my computer's being persnickety, so I'm not gonna risk it. But his numbers were incredibly consistent in that series. He had between 50 and 55 in 4 of the 5 games, and like 46 in the other. I'm getting that all right, give or take a point or two. So it is a much better spot for him. So I would be more exposed to Embiid relative to Simmons because I think, especially with the giant prize pools, people not really knowing what the hell is going on, I think Simmons is owned more than he should be in a sticky matchup because I don't think people remember that it was fairly bad for him. I like Simmons a hell of a lot more on DraftKings, where the price is not so ridiculous, obviously.
How are you approaching, or how would you approach if you were playing lineups? Because obviously Eddie is a person who actually knows things in the industry and isn't allowed to do that. But if you were playing lineups tonight with Steven Adams, given the late swap changes and all that, how would you approach that if you were a person who's like, I really think Adams is in a great spot. I want to have him in there in case he does play or he does play enough.
It shouldn't be too much trouble, but you should be able to plan it out now. You've got 18 minutes and change left. You build your lineup with Steven Adams in it, obviously. Make sure whoever's building lineups, you want your guys in the late game in those later spots in those lineups. So you want them in the guard forward utility at the bottom if you're playing DraftKings. If you are playing somewhere with late swap, which it sounds like it is, build them in there and be prepared for a double swap of Adams to Noel and upgrading someone. So if you have a minimum price guy, you can go Adams to Noel and upgrade, your minimum price guy to Klay Thompson or Dennis Schroeder for some reason he's not in your lineup, or someone who's in the middle, or you can upgrade your Dennis Schroeder to Steph Curry. But I would be ready for the double swap. But you should be able to plan it out pretty easily now, and you would just upgrade a guy and change Steven Adams into Nerlens Noel.
Yeah, Nerlens Noel is a good fallback to have in that option there. Some questions in the premium chat. Again, if you are a member of Awesemo.com, we are keeping an eye on the Slack in the premium basketball channel right now, so drop your stuff in there. SJM26B wondering, what's your favorite value plays overall on the slate?
Okay, well, it's a bit site dependent, unfortunately. I mean, there's Yahoo and Fantasy Draft, and it looks like there's going to be some overlay in a few places. I'm going to take that. I'm going to take this sort of as a cue to do an overlay lap. So, because we want you guys to make money, and this is the best way to talk about it. So, the main event on FanDuel, the 1 million, is already not overlaying. So, and if anyone watched the show yesterday, they'll know I'm fairly certain I got this correct when we were talking about it. I said, I think people said, do you think the million will overlay? I said, no, but it won't rake fully. I think it'll take in something like 1,050,000 and pay out $1 million. And I'm going to be about right. Right now it's taking in 1,028,000. And it's still ticking up pretty consistently. So it's going to rake somewhere around 8-10% instead of raking a full 15%. So not a mortgage your house situation, but certainly something you can take a look at. I'm real quickly seeing if there is anything else here that looks like it's going to overlay significantly, but it certainly doesn't look like it. No, looking by entry fees at the largest tournaments there. Their $1 SWAT on FanDuel, which is a 3-entry max, which is the reason it is going to overlay significantly. It has $20,000 in prizes. It's got $15,200 coming in right now, and it can only get 3 per person, so that really slows the ability of people to jump in and cap it up as opposed to, say, 150. So that will overlay, and if you're low stakes or it's just worth your time to get a few dollars in there, every dollar you put in that tournament, up to $3, is going to be worth about $1.25. So it's 3 clicks. If you're in anything on FanDuel, make sure you max out the $20,000 SWAT. Taking a look over at DraftKings, their tournament will get very, very close to filling for $1 million. It's at 142K out of 147K entries right now. So it's already pretty much getting its 15% in rake. Sorting by entry as well. Their 400K Slam Jam, which offers $100,000 to first and is $222 to enter, which isn't cheap, is only 75% filled right now. So that's ends up being about a net of it's overlaying about 23% off the top of my head right now. So that's probably going to definitely be worth it. Their $33 tournament is going to not fill but not overlay. So there's some value there. And then Yahoo, which again, it's not the first 3 or 4 weeks of the fantasy football season, Yahoo just gives away a giant pile of money. And literally, even if you don't play DFS, you should have an account and play Yahoo weeks 1 to 4 of NFL, because they just 3 years in a row now gave away, just literally had a lot of tournaments that filled 50-60%. Made it really hard not to win. No appreciable overlay there. They have a $25 entry tournament that is just that's going to fill 80-85%. So if 25 isn't out of your range of expenditure, that's definitely a place to look at. Oh, and there's a big tournament going on Draft right now for tomorrow's slate. I don't think they have anything for tonight's slate, and it would be too late for NBA. However, but on Draft, not Fantasy Draft, but Draft, they have a tournament tomorrow, which everyone should enter, and don't take your center until last. People keep talking to me about this tournament on Draft, and Jokic is towards the top, and Towns is a power forward there. There's two, and Drummond against Brooklyn is like the third-rated guy. So they keep going the first round is just wrong because there's like 6 incredible center plays on Wednesday. Everybody's going to play 3 if the positions work out that way on DraftKings. But it is Drummond against the Nets and Jokic, and then it's Whiteside against Vucevic and Vuce against Whiteside, which, again, historically anyone who's been following the show for a while knows what that means. And it's Cantor versus Atlanta and Capella against New Orleans. So go there, play in that tournament, and don't take your center until your 5th pick because there's 6 of them who project to be massive.
Let's get back to the 2-game slate. That's a little preview, a little taste of the beautiful mind of Eddie on a 12-game slate. But let's talk about some quick questions from the premium chat right now. Rank KD, Steph, and Embiid, please, for every man.
Yeah, I have them very, very close. I would have them raw points, Embiid, then Durant, then Steph. Something like 51 to 47 to 45. But, when you add price in there, they end up profiling fairly similarly, though on DraftKings that does make Embiid my projected favorite there. But they're all very close. There's none of them that I'm... They're close enough that I would say it has more to do with how you're stacking the games and your correlation plays as opposed to individual exposure. If I was ignoring, narratives and just building 150 lineups, I would have roughly the same amount of all 3 of those players. Probably in the area of 40 or 50%, which I expect to be about what they're owned. It's a tough spot. There's really no reason beyond building a narrative with a lineup to expect much more out of one of them than the others.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Steph, I think in general, I like him on a ring night. I like him when the home crowd is kind of most on his side. I think it just sort of feeds into him in a way that's, not unique amongst the NBA, but fairly unique and unique on that team especially. And I also think too, Steph compared to like going KD or Durant, I think there's a pretty big difference between Steph and the guards behind him versus KD. I think he's pretty close with Paul George.
Sure.
So I'd probably go Steph and beat KD just based upon positional availability. But I think your view on that's totally fair too. Re-up asking, what's Eddie's best center play on FanDuel?
Yeah, it's best is always somewhat difficult to comment on. The play I would be most interested in playing is Nerlens Noel myself, just because it is a 2-game slate. I don't expect the ownership to be significant, and there's a number of very reasonable scenarios where it goes very well. It's not a cash play. I'm not over the moon about it. Again, Noel and Saric are the 2 players I look at on this slate, and I'm like, I think this guy will be under-owned relative to how good he could be, and I can very easily visualize it working really well. Like, looking at FanDuel, I can see, Saric even at 6 and change there. I think almost everyone's going to double punt this position, so you're going to get Saric at 32% owned or something, and you could really very easily put up a 40-burger, and if other people are punting there and the other punt positions don't work out that well, that can really get there. And I can see Nerlens Noel, just Steven Adams' back is hurt, and so they pull him a little early, or he gets the blowout runner. I can just see a lot of ways in which he gets 30 fantasy points for 4K on FanDuel and 3,600 on DK. So more inclined towards those guys at those prices. But I guess Nerlens Noel is my favorite play, quote unquote.
You mentioned this a little earlier in the show, but obviously people stream in and out, so I think it's probably worth addressing one more time. From Mike in the YouTube chat, any blowout scare for OKC Golden State if Adams is out along with Russ already out? I guess, how would you handle a blowout if it occurs?
Yeah, again, you don't have a ton of choice because we won't know presumably about Steven Adams in the next 9 minutes. So we're gonna, I don't think Adams being out is maybe as big of a hiccup as you might think, but it's definitely, moves the line another 1.5 or so. Again, this to me is just, build a narrative. If you think the second game might blow out, then you fade mostly Steph and Durant. Clay, that DK price is much cheaper, plays at a position with larger scarcity issues on this slate, and tends to be in longer rotationally in blowouts than the other 2. So it's not going to be many lineups they're going to play no Steph, no KD. So, and that's going to leave you with a pile of money. So, I definitely think a very viable build is I play bench guys from the second game, something like Noel and Cook, and then play just Clay, and then 5 guys from the early game or 6 guys from the early game where I play Simmons and Embiid and Kyrie and, I don't know, Tatum. Or vice versa, and you play the Marcus Smart guys, you play the Terry Rozier guys, who's a very strong tournament play. FanDuel $4,100 because they don't feel the need to change their prices even when you move from the preseason to the regular season. It still makes some sense as a tournament play. So you either build to it or build away from it, but it's a legit thing to be concerned about. But it's worth noting that Steve Kerr does not bail that early. Like, it needs to be a whooping for those guys not to play out the third quarter. Like, they really need to be up 26 at the end of 8 minutes into the third for those guys to lose a massive amount of time and not still get their 26, 27 minutes. So I would not be overly concerned with it, but it's a 2-game slate. Stacking games is always better the fewer games are on the slate. And it doesn't get fewer than 2. Well, I guess there are 1-game slates now, but you are stacking that game. So yes, there's a strong merit to piling on one game.
It might be tough to win a showdown if you didn't stack that game.
Yeah,
I think that's not a great game.
That'd be rough.
People asking him a lot of thoughts about Hamidou Diallo. Obviously, given the blowout build talk, it does make sense to consider him. People in general, though, asking about him relative to McConnell and some other guys. How do you feel about Diallo, and I guess relative to the other guys in his price range?
Yeah, he's a guy who I expect to be a little bit overowned, but I still have interest in that very specific build. He's $3,100 on DK. That's obviously a very appealing price. In tournaments, I would probably rather McConnell at this point. If I'm game agnostic, if I'm setting aside that I'm trying to stack one game or not stack one game, etc. But shooting guard on FanDuel is a little trickier because Schroeder is there, and again, that's really hard to get away from. So sure, your next guy you can throw in can be Hamidou Diallo. We don't know who's going to start that game at the 2. Now again, I'm not going to be a big fan of any of those guys against Golden State. None of them are that exceptionally good at making their own shot. Frankly, both Abrinas and Turd Ferguson are well, Turd is appropriate. They're not players who we can rely on to create a lot of fantasy usage for themselves. It just doesn't look like a spot in which they should be that great. But again, they make a little more sense on FanDuel because you're punting your lowest score anyway, so grabbing one of those guys makes sense. I do think because of the chance of a blowout, if you're going to play a shooting guard on OKC, the one you should go with would be Hamidou Diallo. So, I tend to I try to give more nuanced takes and talk, here's the 13 things I feel about this guy, and then you can decide how much you like them, as opposed to just saying, I like this guy and I don't like this guy. There's several reasons to like Hamidou Diallo. He's extremely cheap. There is an upside. I think people overestimate how good he is. He is not an incredible basketball player. He had a very good preseason game where he randomly put up 27 fantasy points one day and, played one game where he played 36 minutes and got into overtime. But, most of the time, you asked me to guess his line tonight, he's going to play 22 minutes and have 13 fantasy points. So I wouldn't, completely wet my panties over him, but he's definitely in play.
Actually, here's probably a good question for you to answer. I know you talked about it at length before on a video, but how would you play the minimum price player or the actual drop player on FanDuel? Would you play a minimum price player since they drop the lowest score, or how would you approach it for Logan in the YouTube chat?
Doing the very quick version of this, and I have like 4 pages of notes, which will turn into an hour-long video at some point. Basically, whenever it's convenient, you probably already were, but now should really play a minimum price guy. It will always be the right thing to do. There will be times it doesn't win, but it's never not going to be mathematically right to play a minimum price guy. It's never going to be right to, I'm going to fade it by playing only guys that cost 5K and more. That's an asinine concept. You're just burning a giant pile of money, and your lineup is not that different from anyone else's. We're talking about playing one minimum price guy. Have one. So the rest of your lineup is still 8 different spots in which you're differentiating. So honestly, you're probably not changing a damn thing. There are various nuances to it as to how it affects positional relationships. So, when you talk about Nerlens Noel in that concept tonight, it's difficult because you have a real chance of getting 40 out of Horford or 60 out of Embiid. Well, that's going to kind of screw you if you punt that. That's why people want to punt shooting guard, because there's a real chance no shooting guard is that amazing. But again, the problem with that is that you could have both Clay and Schroeder get 40. And we both know that a couple small forwards are going to get there because, Kevin Durant and Paul George are going to get there. So that's the reason why punting power forward is inherently the right thing to do, because there's just guys at all the other places where we can expect two high-scoring guys. It's kind of difficult to see that happening at power forward. Again, I really like Saric, and you can get that game out of, say, Nerlens Noel, or rather Jeremy Grant was what I was thinking. But it's tricky. I mean, you need to pull a big game out of Tatum or Marcus Morris or Draymond Green in what I'm guessing is 24, 25 minutes. So power forward is inherently the correct position to punt tonight, basically for that reason.
Since you mentioned that, Renpack asking on the premium Slack, favorite minimum price power forward on FanDuel, Looney, Amir, or Pat? Who'd you go with?
I would probably play... I would definitely play Looney in tournaments. That's not close. I would strongly think about Amir in cash. Like, Amir is going to get some more significant time than we're used to. I think you're probably still looking at 19 to 21 minutes, most likely, is where he lands with the other guys who are missing there. Even though they said they're going to go small, he's still going to get some back up the 5 minutes, etc. And it's a matchup I like. So, it's probably barely Amir in cash and barely Looney in tournaments. I'm just not going to play Pat. I expect more people to play Pat than they should. And again, when you're trying to find an advantage in a 2-game slate, there's a real chance Pat scores 9 fantasy points. Like, it's not... The odds of him scoring single digits are like 25-30%. And if that gets me, way the hell ahead on a big chunk of the field, although dropping the lowest score actually hurts you in this particular regard, that would be what I would be inclined to do more than anything else.
Would you go Irving and Bell or Curry and Diallo in DK cash?
I don't really want to play Jordan Bell or Hamidou Diallo in cash, but sometimes you certainly need to. I would play... That's really close. That projects almost identically to me. Both Curry and Irving are very, very strong cash plays. They both got an A cash rating on my list. That ends up being really close. There's not one of those options is vastly superior to the other. I will say Curry and Diallo, but it's very close, and there's some negative correlation with Curry and Diallo. But I'll say Curry and Diallo I would play in cash, but really by a very slim margin.
Let's see. Anything good here? Actually, while we're talking about, I guess, some value plays, do you want to just rank your Warriors big men? We have a couple of guys there who are at ranging prices. On DK, I'm pretty partial to Damian Jones. I think people are overlooking him too much for a guy who's starting, who had a pretty beastly preseason. How are you ranking those guys, Eddie?
Yeah, I think Damian Jones ends up being the most popular, and counting their prices, I like them all about evenly when you're looking at them for tournaments. Like, I can see going with Looney. He's the one who's going to be owned the lowest of those 3 guys pretty significantly and has a real chance of picking up the upside. And with Draymond expected to be limited and a potential blowout, his minutes picture is a little rosier than it would be otherwise. Bella's the most expensive, but also just inherently probably the best of them. And then Jones is cheap, but probably the most popular. I do think he's, by far the best 3K punt. I saw someone asking, who's your favorite 3K punt? And that would certainly be it for me.
I think that makes sense. If you have your final questions, and we got like 1 minute left, or possibly even less than that.
You got 12 seconds, my friend. 12 seconds.
12 seconds. That minute went by so fast, Eddie. We are closing out. And let's see, any good questions? Really nothing good. People, how are you feeling about TJ McConnell while we're going to that? I'm not playing him at all.
Yeah, I think the most likely scenario is that he plays 12 to 14 minutes and scores hopefully that many fantasy points. Like, he is not out of play. Like, there's stud plays we can hope kind of get there, and then you get TJ McConnell is not quite, Daniel Tice. It's not that bad. We know he will be in there. They specifically mentioned he's going to get some time. And we have seen games previously, especially against other division opponents, against the Knicks, where he randomly has just massive games, and they let him play out the string. I just think the existence and the emergence of Markelle Fultz really is putting a big cap on that upside. So, like, I just see that 26-minute, 47 fantasy point near triple-double out of him almost impossible to achieve at this point. And then, considering the matchup, I'm just generally disinclined. Like, it's the Celtics. I really don't think he's going to go off and do it here. So, I get it. Certainly nothing wrong with it. We're talking about the 3K guys. None of them project that beautifully, but I think I'm also disinclined towards it. Although I'm interested to see. Let me see if I can get us some ownership.
I was going to ask if you wanted to do that. I don't know if you wanted to stick around now that we're on a new schedule.
Oh no, I'm always in for a nice ownership game here. All right, I'm into a DraftKings account. Here is the $1 million opening tip-off. Darius Saric, by the way, you know how much I said Saric was going to be on? Do you remember?
I don't. I assume it's correct.
I said 35%. He is 35.4% owned.
Ooh, okay.
Right on.
That's how you ask me the question and you know the answer already.
Yes, that increases my chances of looking like I know what I'm talking about. So yes, that's an old trick, right there. I want to apologize ahead of time before we go for making you basically mean, ugly mug the camera for an hour. Like that's not cool. If it makes you feel better, the other day I had taken I had my first technical issue in quite some time, and my stream was going in and out. So I thought I was actually off air and my connection was dead. And I had taken a shoulder to the jaw playing basketball earlier that day. So I'm sitting here with the stream live and apparently several hundred people watching going like, for 5 or 6 minutes, which there were many not particularly flattering screenshots.
They probably just thought that's your process, how you get ready for a show.
Yeah, I massaged my jaw violently. So Joel Embiid, 52.4%, Jason Tatum, 37.8%, Kyrie Irving, 37%, Darius Saric, 35%, Horford, 30%, Jaylen Brown, 29%, Covington, 29%. So, curiously enough, by the way, Covington well under on Saric. So, 6%, but still. Simmons, 26%. Again, that's pretty smart. Like that's people know what they're talking about. Fultz 25, Redick 18, Rozier 16, Smart 16, Marcus Morris 12, Gordon Hayward 8.9. Like a lot of people were saying today, and I heard repeatedly people saying, "Well, I think Gordon Hayward's just way overowned with that minutes cap." This is a very this would indicate a fairly intelligent group of watchers. Like these ownerships are not wildly disproportionately wrong in anywhere. Like I'm legitimately excited about Kyrie Irving at 37%. Like that's lower than I think you. Now again, the DK prices are more competitive. I was discussing on the show frequently recently that there's sort of a cap put on the prices. Like the FanDuel prices go 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then the studs go like 10, 11, 12,000. DK goes like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then just curves way the hell down with the points per cost curve exposure, and you get, Anthony Davis and Giannis and Harden at like 8.5 now. So it's really screaming at you to play studs and scrubs, and it does proportionately, because of that, disincentivize you to play guys in the 7K range a la Kyrie Irving. Like, it makes him actively worse because they only make you spend $1,000, $1,200 more to get monsters out there. So no,
I think that makes sense. I think I've played DFS now regularly with graduating levels of skill each year. And obviously last year working here for the back half of the season was very helpful. People get smarter every year, and it's noticeably so. And I played some of your preseason. Eddie, I told you before we came on, I watched some of your videos. I mean, I know the stuff well enough from writing about the NBA every day. But I felt like, in the beginning of the season, like you could tell with how you were approaching it, where you're like, oh, people won't know this, and people do know that now. It's still not perfect, but people are getting smarter, and I think the more people catch on to that and realize you're not going against idiots now, the better you'll be.
62 seconds in, Darius Saric has a rebound and a block. 62 seconds.
Like I'm with you on that, and apparently Robert Covington has an air ball.
That's all is right in the world. An air ball. That's Lonzo style. He did that the other day. But Lonzo had been out forever. I don't know what Covington's excuse is. But yeah, there's overweight Saric. Let's hope to overweight Noel. The cream dream is you always want those wedge spots, and you always want people to play badly, and you didn't get them a lot. But in the preseason, again, there was the day where, like, pretty clearly Tobias Harris was going to sit. And so, like, an hour and a half before lock, I go on air an hour before lock, and I'm like, I'm pretty sure I would increase my exposure massively on FanDuel today because Tobias Harris is probably not going to play, and he's going to be like 50-something% owned. And he didn't play. That's another rebound for Dario Saric. He's got 2 rebounds.
I support that.
He didn't play, and it was 52% owned. So, this is not nearly as big of a hedge spot there. We did get Saric lower owned than he should be at those prices. He's 5.5K on DK. That's too cheap. You're trying to pull a bit of edge everywhere you can, and that's that's the story of the whole thing. That's why I think it's important to make sure you take advantage of overlay and talk more about process, and because it's really, to break even, you've got to make up that rake, whether it's 10 or 15%, depending how much cash or GPPs you play, and you got to claw at that 1% here, 2% there, every way until you can get it. So it's you always look for a good wedge spot. So if I have a 20% chance Steven Adams sits tonight, that's pretty exciting for me to play Nerlens Noel in what I think will just be an absolute smashing spot. Like if Steven Adams doesn't play, I would have him projected at center too. I would have him over Horford.
Oh wow! All right, that's a bold choice, but I think it all makes sense to me.
36 minutes in I'd project him for 43 or something. I would put a massive number behind that guy in that situation. I don't know.
He's about as good of a permanent player as we have on the slate, especially out of those cheap guys.
Yeah,
so
out of the cheap guys, very close. I mean, Felton is not a bad permanent guy. I'm curious what the career points, DraftKings points per minute is for Nerlens Noel. I'll guess it's StatMuse will throw that one up first. Shout out to StatMuse. So I'll if I can get my stuff to barely load here, I will look. I'm gonna say he's 1.1 career.
He was 1.04 last year. That's all I have in front of me.
Oh, there you see. All right, Nerlens Noel, career DraftKings points per minute. So it might be 1.0, not 1.1. And it didn't work. That's pretty frustrating. That's quality TV here, everyone. Quality. I'll put the word. Oh, that worked. It is 1. It is slightly more than 1. He's got, it's actually slightly less than 1. I stand corrected. So it's about 1 right on the nose. But again, it's a matchup in which I would expect that to trend up pretty significantly. So it's probably like 1.1, 1.2. So if you think he plays 32 minutes, that's 35, 38 fantasy points. That works for me. We were talking, so the other day, well, a few weeks ago now in the preseason, TJ Leaf had a massive game. And that I basically said, don't play TJ Leaf. He's not good at basketball. And he went off that night and had 40-something fantasy points in one of the most luck-bomby games ever, and he proceeded to be bad every game for the rest of the season. He had multiple, I played 30x minutes and scored fantasy point in the teen games for the rest of the preseason. But people were, excoriating me and giving me shit over not, pushing TJ Leaf more. So that night I hosted a game online, which was called the TJ Leaf game, which was me versus the audience. We have to go back and forth and try to name NBA players who have played in this century who are career worse fantasy point per minute scorers than TJ Leaf and have played at least the 458 minutes he has played in the regular season. And it was hard. But the winner of the night was Semi Ojeleye. TJ Leaf is one of many, many bad players. Dorian Finney-Smith, a number of other guys who clock in the 0.6. He's at like 0.64, but it rounds down to the nearest tenth of a point. So he is in that pile of 0.6 fantasy points per minute career players. There were a few bad ones who were 0.5s, but the only person who anyone named, and we did this for some number of hours, I assure you, Semi Ojeleye is in the 0.4 club.
Oof.
I assume it's 0.44 or something, but still, yowza. That is not winning money.
You measure those biceps though. Those points are adding up fast.
Yeah, doing good.
Throw them in the mix. Yeah. We did enough, right? That's enough for today. We'll be back again tomorrow. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. Throw likes. Eddie will be here every day. It's going to be a mix of me and Josh being the number 2 chair to Eddie, but obviously we'll have his genius in here. Use promo code Live Before Lock. Get a week free. All of our ownership projections, Osmos rankings, the premium content that we have every day. So much to make you a winner. In addition to Eddie, and obviously the premium Slack, which we referenced a bunch, all the questions we go through there first. So go please sign up, promo code Live Before Lock for 1 week free.
Yeah.
Eddie, any parting words on our first show?
Yeah, I wanted to say tonight you didn't get a ton being a member that you didn't get watching the free show because it's 2 games and I have time to break everything down. But I kicked out a list of 50 players tonight and gave them all a cash ranking and a tournament ranking, and tomorrow that's going to be a lot more valuable because I don't know if I can get a 90-minute show. I'll try to get one, but in 60 or 90 minutes, I'm still not going to be able to talk about the 440 viable players to play in tomorrow's tournament. So that cheat sheet, along with these several sets of projections available to the premium members, are worth the price of admission. They're worth $1 or $2 a day.
Yeah, it's a 12 game slate we have going tomorrow. So a lot of action to pair through. So you have all the insight that we give every single day on our Live Before Lock show. So thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you guys again soon.
Whew.
All right. We're all good.
We're done. I'm curious now. Let's see if I can unstick your face.
Yeah. So like I always have